And that's why I wanted us to turn to Psalm 14 this morning. Psalm 14, to reframe our perspective in these strange and shocking times. I want to remind you how it really is all about who God is. It really is all about our response to God. Contrary to claims that you can conduct any portion of life or society devoid of religion, we need to remember truth and error, right and wrong, those are what would be called inherently religious categories because they're defined by God. And those matter in everything. Therefore, we need to recall that we're always either being ashamed of God and His gospel and His law, or we're being bold and faithful to God and His gospel and His word. Because every conversation really is about God. So, today we're going to look at Psalm 14 as an illustration of this that can kind of help us. David wrote Psalm 14 as a reminder to think about everything rightly in relation to God and why that matters. And so we're going to note three goals, you might say, three goals to strive for in speaking truth to ourselves and to others from what we see in this psalm. The first goal to strive for in following the wisdom of this psalm is to understand and expose folly in relation to God. Point number one, understand and expose folly in relationship to God. And folly is just another word for foolishness, right? Folly is another word for foolishness, right? That means what is not wise, what is not good, what is not beneficial and helpful, what is not smart. So application number one, understand and expose folly in relation to God. Understand and lovingly expose folly in relation to God. Expose their folly. Show how empty, destructive, dangerous, even ridiculous it is to live life apart from God. State the obvious. Don't be scared to state the obvious. And things are really obvious today. Show how offensively arrogant their thoughts are as they self-identify in all their self-exalting, self-defining ways. Show how their path will lead away from everything good forever. Read the Proverbs. Share the Proverbs. The Proverbs do that repeatedly. If you believe this, if you go this path, look where it leads. If you believe this, and you follow God's path and His wisdom, look at the blessing, look where it leads. And that's where David takes us in verse 2, the next two verses, verses 2 and 3. He first modeled for us how to understand and expose folly in relation to God. That was number one. Next, number two, understand and explain reality. Understand and explain reality in relation to God. It's folly. It's folly for any person to think that they can look down on God and make judgments about God. That someone who is so limited, so small, would look at the Creator, the ruler, the maker of all things, and try to judge Him. That's folly. But in contrast, it's reality that God, outside of creation, above creation, transcendent above time and all that He made, that He would look down from heaven upon the sons of men, upon the creatures that He'd made, and make judgments about us. That's reality. That's how things really are. So we need to understand and explain reality. So we need to speak that to others and continually speak it to ourselves, right? And don't speak as if man is on top and God is on the bottom, and you need to kind of evaluate and see if it'll work for you. God is always on top, and He has the right to decide, and we are under Him, and we follow Him. We listen, we receive revelation, because we're dependent creatures. And so verse 1 shows the folly of having man over God. Verses 2 and 3 shows the reality of God over man. And then quickly, verses 4 to 7 point to the finality of God over man. The finality of God over man. So quickly, we'll read those and make a third final application point. Understand and emphasize eternity in relation to God. Understand and emphasize eternity in relation to God. Transcendence, you might say. Finality. Sometimes people do not listen when they are warned about their folly and when they're spoken to about true reality in relation to God. And so God spoke through David next to clarify He would bring justice in the end. He would repay evildoers. He would rescue His people. Look at verses 4 to 7. Understand and expose folly in relation to God. Understand and explain reality in relation to God. And understand and emphasize eternity in relation to God. Those are just a few reminders of how to think, how to minister in a world where you look around and say, wow, Romans 1 has taken place. God has abandoned and given people over. It's not a time to sit quiet. It's not a time to avoid conflict. It's not a time to compromise and not try to speak out on those issues. It's a time to think, to engage in biblical assessment of folly, to see the roots of it, to expose the roots of it, and to speak truth into it.